Off you go. The floor is yours, Sheila.
Yes, so welcome from me.
Yeah, Leon.
Welcome from me. I will just paste my own information into the chat. So I'm Sheila Webber. I'm a faculty member in the Information School at the University of Sheffield, and I'll be chairing this session, but also contributing to it and to celebrate Global Media and Information Literacy Week, which started today and it runs until the 31st of October. And our topic is information literacy as a discipline. What's the difference? It's been sponsored by three organisations. The CILIP Information Literacy Group, that's CILIP, it used to be the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals. It usually gets given more of a kind of tagline nowadays, but it is the UK Association for people in the information and library field. And the Information Literacy Group is probably its strongest group, specialist group, which has its own organisation. It's a well-known conference that runs once a year, LILAC, and an excellent website, which is linked there. And thanks to them for setting up the Zoom and organising the registration for this conference. The second organisation involved is the Institute for Information Literacy at Purdue. Do you want to say a few words about this, Clarence?
Sure, thanks, Sheila. So the Institute for Information Literacy at Purdue started in 2021, and the primary mission of the group is to support and encourage information literacy research that focuses on information challenges such as misinformation, sort of new challenges coming out of AI and so forth. So really, kind of doing that work with an eye towards developing information literacy sort of interventions or, solutions, that would help us navigate those sort of challenges. So we mostly, primarily our work is giving out seed grants to research teams that are doing that kind of work. We also work with undergraduates in a variety of ways, and we hold an annual symposium.
Thanks very much, Clarence. And he'll be introducing himself in text chat.
Nice.
And I think someone hasn't got their microphone muted, who's amongst the participants. So it would be great if you could mute your microphones, just a reminder. And the third organisation involved is mine, the University of Sheffield Information School, Libraries, Information and Society Research Group. So we have clusters of researchers within the Information School. And this one has a number of core themes. I won't read them all out, but it includes exploring information literacy and information behaviour. And the members include Dr. Sharon Wagg, Dr. Pamela McKinney, who's another researcher who also focuses centrally on information literacy, Dr. Jane Finley, Professor Bryony Bird, and Dr. Leo Appleton, as well as our PhD students and research assistants. And there's just some information about the Information School at Sheffield at the bottom of the screen. So the panelists today are Professor Clarence Mabey, Purdue University Libraries and School of Information Studies, USA, who you've already heard from. Dr. Karen Kaufman, School of Information, University of South Florida, USA. Myself at the Information School at the University of Sheffield. Bill Johnston, who was formerly at the University of Strathclyde, and he's an activist and researcher based in Scotland. And Dr. Saida Shahid, Assistant Professor, Towson University in the USA, and formerly at the University of the Punjab in Pakistan. And the outline is that I'm going to say a few words about ILIAD, the idea of ILIAD, and the collaboration that has grown up over the last few years. And then you'll get a very short perspective from each of the panelists. Also we're interested in your perspectives on this idea of information literacy discipline as well. So I'll be talking a bit more about how we'll do that in a moment. So to introduce ILIAD, for me, this goes back about, in fact, nearly 25 years, when Bill Johnston and I were discussing the importance of information literacy and started researching and writing about it and talking of it as a field in itself, and even a discipline. And there are two papers we've produced, one from 2005 and one from 2017, in which we were laying out our reasons for saying that this was a discipline. And there are a number of indicators for a discipline. Now, the field of disciplinarity has developed, and in our 2017 paper, I also explore a more inclusive definition of disciplinarity. But these kinds of indicators on this screen are the sort of ones that are generally seen as being signals, indicators that there is a disciplinary area there, including the fact that there is a knowledge base, that there are dedicated journals and conferences and associations, there are doctoral students, and there may be practice clusters and sets of discourses, different views and perspectives on what the discipline is, but there is a certain common understanding and feeling and motivation. And ILIAD started in 2021, started up by Karen and Clarence in collaboration with Christine Bruce, the well-known, one of the founding researcher in the information literacy field back at the end of the 1990s, with her kind of landmark study about the 7 phases of information literacy, and also John Budd, a scholar in the USA. And then Bill and I have joined, and there's now a wider community, a wider international community, collaborating together around this concept of information literacy as a discipline. And there've been a lot of presentations. As you can see, this kind of accumulation growing through the years, of more and more of them. In fact, one at the LILAC in the UK was one of the founding ones. And obviously we've got today. I think it was last week, Clarence and Karen were in Egypt at the CILIP conference, which is the sister conference to the European Conference on Information Literacy. And CILIP takes place more in the African region. And it's also culminating in the Information Literacy Handbook, which we've been working on now for well over a year, and which has many contributors. I'm just seeing whether I want to, there it is. The section authors come from over 20 countries with many sections covering information communities. There are a large number of chapters, each focused on encapsulating aspects of information literacy and people's engagement with it, which is due to be published in September 2025. One thing is that through the conferences, we've been gathering people's reactions and thoughts about the idea of information literacy being recognised as a discipline. And one of the things that has been used is Slido to get these kind of word clouds. And what we've done as a next step is to list out some of the as many responses as we can, kind of consolidating them from previous conferences, using this qualitative data to produce a questionnaire. And I'll just post the link to the questionnaire in text chat. So we've got this Google form in which, or perhaps if some of my fellow panelists could periodically repost that for later joiners. So we've listed, we thought we've almost reached saturation with the numbers of different reactions that people had to it. And what we would be interested in you doing is filling in this questionnaire. It's totally anonymous. And ticking the reactions that resonate with you, which vary from skeptical and oh dear through to excited and uplifting, with kind of all sorts of variations in between. And there's an option at the end to add your own words. That's an option, you don't have to do that. And we'll be looking at the results of that at the end of the webinar. It's obviously quite a rough and ready research instrument, but we'll be looking at your reactions through that, and there'll be a chance to discuss things. So I've already talked about the handbook, and I'm going to now hand over to Clarence Maybe to give his brief perspective. Each of the panelists will just give a very short, kind of 5 to 7 minute perspective, and we'll have the discussion and questions after all the panelists have finished.
All right, thank you very much, Sheila. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I wanted to, and if we go to the next slide, please, talk a little bit about sort of, we were thinking about implications, right? So if information literacy is recognized as a discipline, or I've been thinking about that a lot, then, kind of what would it mean for our practices? And one of the things that commonly we talk about at these conferences is, instruction in our, education, information literacy teaching efforts, and what would that look like, and would it change? Would we do something differently? And so I thought about it, reflected on that myself, right, in my own context at Purdue. What would change if we recognized information literacy as a discipline? And one of the things that I think about a lot is sort of the changing world that we live in, right? So thinking about, it wasn't, I guess I've been a librarian for about 20 years, and, it wasn't that long ago when, it seemed like really helping students prepare for the things they were doing in their courses, which is still extremely important, was, made a lot of sense for librarians to focus on. But I think that, as we see in the world, sort of the information landscape, like I think we've always recognized that there were a lot of challenges, the information community and the library community. But I think that more and more people are becoming aware of these challenges. And in the US, of course, it's, we're getting close to our national election. And so there's many issues. You can just read in the press every day about misinformation and disinformation, things that are occurring. Of course, things like AI are really bringing about some challenges. I would also say that, there's also amazing opportunities around in the information space as well. And we, want to think about those things also. So the opportunities that AI affords. But at the end of the day, I think from my perspective, learners and everyone needs to sort of think through how they can approach these, how to best approach these things, right? And address sort of challenges they see, as well as take advantage of opportunities. Of course, misinformation and disinformation in the healthcare arena, which we became very aware of during the pandemic. But I think everyone would agree that there continues to be issues that people need to navigate to be successful in whatever that they're trying to accomplish in their lives, right? So sort of the work that we've been doing in academia is still essential and important, and the bulk of my work as an information literacy researcher and educator was in that space. But I think that today we have this sort of call to address sort of a wider need and make our students aware of sort of what's happening in our societies, and how do they navigate information more broadly, as they move out into their careers and things like that. So I think it's a slightly different game than it was when I became a librarian 20 years ago, right? And so what does that mean then for academic librarians and their teaching practices? And I am a librarian, and I do teach a course at Purdue University, and I've been thinking a lot about a colleague who's involved in this work, Bill Badke, who wrote an article in 2008 saying, what would we teach if information literacy was a discipline? And he points out that a lot of what we teach now, tends to be teaching students what he calls in the article applications, right? So how do we evaluate information? How do we, manage data, things like that? And that he suggests that if we recognize information literacy as a discipline, but a discipline is sort of based on a philosophy, right? So theories and research methods of different sorts. So how do we go about making inquiries? And also then applications, right? How do we just do things, that we teach people in our field to do? And so, that sort of makes me think that we probably, if recognizing information literacy as a discipline, would lead to us sort of needing to think about the scope of what we're teaching students. And do we need to sort of teach them sort of broad concepts about what information literacy is and how we go about that and how we go about studying it, as well as then the things that we people are doing that now, but I do think that, we tend to focus on the application side of the house. And so just to finish off, I think I have more questions about the last point than maybe I do about the others. So then what would we do to arrange ourselves in that way? So I would say at Purdue, the libraries was designated a school. So it's the Libraries and School of Information Studies. And we have a minor, which a minor in the US system is, students have a major. So the major thing they're studying, and then they can pick a minor, which is some series of courses that sort of augment the primary thing that they're studying. And so the libraries has developed a minor, which is a series of about 4 or 5 courses that students would take to study, about information, right? We have courses that are about information in society. We have courses that are about sort of using data in different ways. And, the idea is to sort of augment their job readiness. And I'm not saying that model would work for all institutions. It's just a model that we're using at Purdue, and I do think it would work for some. I think there's no right answer. We talk about this a lot. So, some libraries could approach, if they recognize information literacy as a discipline, might continue doing exactly what they're doing today. And then others might think about, are there different structures that we could advocate for within our universities that would really help teach a broader scope of information literacy to students? So with that, I'll end there and turn it back over to Sheila.
Thank you, Clarence. And now we're going to move on to Karen, if you'd like to give your perspective.
Sure. Thank you, and great to be with you all today. So this slide is intended to sort of follow up with some of the points Clarence made regarding the idea of, if information literacy is a discipline, how does that lens perhaps reframe the way we converse about and around information literacy in our particular structures, whatever role we play as an academic librarian, perhaps, maybe as a researcher, a scholar, an instructor in a school of information or some related disciplinary structure, which I know is different across the globe, how that might be organized. But just consider for a moment, if you would, sort of this slide as a prompt. So how does this reshape or redefine not only just maybe how we talk about this, but also maybe our own identity around information literacy? So prior to joining the iSchool at the University of South Florida in the USA, I was an academic librarian for over 12 years. And really, Clarence and I sort of shared a lot of conversations around the work of academic librarians. But if you would consider, not only does or could, if information literacy were adopted, acknowledged, embraced as a discipline, how does that look in terms of ways to promote inclusive ways of thinking about subdisciplines? Let's pretend that information literacy is a discipline, sort of like psychology. And then we have these subdisciplines, which some examples are on the screen. But psychology, for example, has abnormal psychology, developmental psychology. So it isn't just maybe, very, very segmented, but rather expansive. So sort of thinking around these ideas, what would curricula look like given your institution or the structure of administration for coursework? Or I know that term might not resonate everywhere, but the kinds of classes that would be offered and how that would be programmatically perhaps redefined or readjusted. And then I also just wanted to mention the IFLA Trends Report, which the 2024 report was just launched on September 30. And this report explores 7 key trends in the information and knowledge environment. And so those trends include knowledge practices are changing, AI and other technologies are transforming society, trust is being renegotiated, skills and abilities are becoming more complex, digital technologies are unevenly distributed, information systems are using more resources, and people are seeking community connection. I would suggest that these trends are really a mirror that support this idea of information literacy disciplinarity, in that things are changing. And we are sort of on the cusp of opening the opportunity to consider information literacy as a discipline when maybe, when Paul Zurkowski first coined the term 50 years ago, I have this great CILIP button. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, right there. Yeah. This 50-year celebration, we have matured. This disciplinary structure has emerged. And perhaps we can think about it a little differently at this point in time. The IFLA 2021 Trends Report identified as the number 18 trend was information literacy is valued. And one of the key features was that governments and others recognize the importance of information literacy as a long-term response to the rise of misinformation. And you can read the report. But what I'm suggesting is not only in the UK and not only in the US, but globally, we're seeing this change in our information ecosystem and how we think about it, how we talk about it, how we identify with it, brings from my perspective, great opportunities to more fully situate and refine, as Clarence mentioned, the philosophy of information, our theories, our methods, and then the applications versus what often I experienced as an academic librarian is we started with the applications and we forgot to talk about the why. So this maybe is a way for us to enter into that conversation a little more fully. So I will leave it there and pass it on to Sheila to guide us to the next speaker.
Thank you, Karen. And that's me. So I'll also open my video. So I'm going to be making 2 points, trying to make 2 points, one of which is picking up from Clarence and Karen and talking about developing people's ability to engage with information. And also I'm going to be talking about improving recognition and how that might have an impact on people as researchers. And so I'm going to start with the researcher one, that if information literacy was owned and named by the community that is doing the research in this area, there might be a more confident awareness of the research base. And I characterize the research base for information literacy as focusing on information, not just media, not just AI, not just data, but the full range of information that actually people do engage with in their lives. So information in the body, information incorporated into the environment. Some people still use print media, some people use have an oral culture. And so it's not just seeing information kind of cut up into boxes, but having a holistic perspective. And I think information literacy can do that and has done that. Also, it is a distinctive research base in that there is so much practitioner research. Most disciplines, I would say, are heavy on academic researchers or specialist researchers doing the research. And there are some applied areas. One is, for example, the field of higher education, which incorporate a lot of practitioner research. And additionally, in the information literacy research base, you've got the input of people who actually are in another discipline and are collaborating with people within the discipline. As it's not the most common thing, but it's certainly not uncommon, for example, having an academic or a school teacher, most often the academic from a disciplinary area, collaborating with the librarian or with another researcher to investigate information literacy. And that brings a very rich series of perspectives. It's not just one narrow disciplinary perspective. It's actually open to accommodate people coming in, learning about the research area and being able to add. But the value is if they could connect with the existing base. So it doesn't just become a scrap of kind of slightly disconnected research studies. There is actually an ability to draw on the roots of information literacy, and also that includes the roots in librarianship and information science, particularly, for example, the information behaviour field. So through that, the international research network could also be improved. I think that's already happened through the ILIAD collaboration. And there could be more impact on research agencies and other agencies, that's funding agencies, but also other agencies, for example, like UNESCO, who don't necessarily recognise that the information literacy is an area by itself. It's often very frustrating that initiatives to do with information sometimes don't even include experts from librarianship or information science or information literacy. And I think we need more confidence and recognition and being willing to own this area for that to happen. The second brief point I'm going to talk about is the one with Clarence talked about the increasing relevance of this disciplinary area to everyone's lives. And I think if information literacy was recognised as a discipline, there might be more confidence in carving out space for everyone to develop their relationship with information and with information literacy, rather than most people's fragmented connection with information, that perhaps in the home, they may be learning things from their parents to do with information, but when they come into formal education, they're not necessarily connecting that up with the information skills and knowledge that are being delivered, usually focused on particular topics or assignments rather than necessarily being connected up together, unless usually the librarian is doing this. And similarly, going to the university, it may be that they're not having an opportunity to actually think about what is my information, how am I going to engage with information throughout my life, how am I going to connect these things up and grow. And it's particularly a problem if it's called all sorts of different things as they progress through life. I wanted to just bring in my experience with, as a final thing, with first level 1 students. We have a library and information services management program, and the students on it are more or less entirely working at the same time as they're doing this part-time course. We have a core module called Information Literacy in semester 1, year 1. And right at the start of that, we ask them to fill in a Padlet, so kind of like a post-it board, virtual post-it board, about what information literacy means to me at this stage, because it's really useful to reflect on where you're starting from and also to see all the other conceptions that other people have. It's a really great discussion point, something where we call all learn, and certainly I learn every year. So I was thinking that this exercise, and I'm just going to show you my overview, which is given with the permission. I did share these slides with the students and say, is it okay to use them? So this is my consolidation of the various things that came up in people's post-its about what they thought information literacy was at the start of the class. And I'm hoping, and from previous experience, it should happen that, well, some people go through and don't have an enormous amount of change, but others see what other people think information literacy is. It gives a possibility for disagreeing, for discussing, to think about what does this mean in my life. Some people gave really interesting anecdotes about how they perceive information literacy, particularly ones from their jobs. For example, someone who was thinking about communicating information to children with special educational needs and how you need to tailor your communication to that. And it's going to be very different to someone else who is talking about journalism and how you, again, tailor to your audience. So obviously not all the students mentioned all of these, but they will have mentioned some of these. And another thing that came up in a number of the postings was an awareness that what they're doing is in context, that the information is in context and the people are in context. The images, some people added images, but I didn't have the copyright to those. And so I created my own similar images using Midjourney AI, but just to give you some of the ideas, including the cat with the laptop. But I was thinking that this kind of awareness of what information literacy is, what it's been to you in your past, what it is currently, how it might develop in the future is something that I'd like everyone to have, and you wouldn't have to be on a library and information course in order to experience that. So now I'm going to be handing over to Bill Johnston to give his perspective.
Right, thanks, Sheila. Those of you who clocked the little piece I put into the chat will realise that I'm a retired person. I retired from the University of Strathclyde in 2010, but the important thing I think for our purposes today is that I had a long career in public and academic libraries, but mainly as an educator, as an academic. And information literacy was one of the things I was involved with quite heavily. Now, as far as today is concerned, I've titled this slide, Iliad, Supporting Citizenship and Democracy in a Time of Polycrisis. Now, it seems to me we are in a time of polycrisis, climate change, war, economic crisis, migration, immigration is a big problem around the world for a lot of people. And I think the term polycrisis...
It didn't even come to my email.
Sorry? Could somebody mute? So you're interrupting whoever you are. To where it was, I think we are in a time of polycrisis, ironically, because 2024 was the year of democratic elections, and more democratic elections around the world this year than any other time. And that, I guess, depends a lot on what you mean by democracy, which is disputed. But to take us somewhere with the Iliad idea, I moved from academic library practice, which is familiar to many people as a place, a host for information literacy activities, to the notion of civic reasoning. And that I got from a project started some years ago at Stanford University, which I think is still going. It's well worth having a look at their website. There are good resources there. But the bottom line for them is that they spotted that it wasn't enough for students to become critical thinkers or whatever in terms of academic study. That needed to have an impact on their civic lives, their role as citizens in democracy, and what have you, which all resonated with me. At the end of the day, if you can't figure out who originated information, what's the evidence they deployed to back it up, and what do alternative sources say, you're kind of in a world of having to take what politicians or newspaper magnates or big tech giants tell you. So there's a big thing there, I think, to be looked at. If we had a discipline of information literacy that was more widely recognised, and we inserted the confidence that Sheila's talked about, we might be able to counter some of the very negative aspects of the polycrisis. Things to do, I've used the term deliberative democracy, which is, I think, becoming increasingly well known as an idea to promote better informed decision making by, instead of simply relying on elections and referenda, creating smaller decision making groups which agree to meet fairly regularly and interact not only with the group members but also with the contributions from academics, experts, civil servants, business people, whoever, around the topic of the democratic activity. Usually these are called citizens' assemblies or sometimes citizens' juries, and they're very good for, I think as an academic, a lot of what I see around citizens' assemblies looks very much like a module in a course that lasts for weeks, months, and then people learn from it. And that establishes not just people's preferences, which you can arguably get from polls, it gets informed preferences. It's not reliant entirely on characteristics like age, gender, and so forth. And that, I think, is quite an important thing. A good example, the one that's usually cited, was in the Republic of Ireland some years ago. They needed to change, or wanted to change, the constitution, the clause that referred to women's reproductive rights, or abortion as it was commonly known. And they used Citizens' Assembly to deal with what was obviously a hugely contentious moral, ethical, medical, social question for the nation. And the agreement seems to be that the Citizens' Assembly was crucial in getting a good, sensible political decision that led to a change in the constitution of an entire nation. And it's come up again in the UK at the moment. There's a bill, private member's bill, before Parliament on the issue of assisted dying, which again, like the abortion, was very contentious. And a number of voices are raised in the media now saying we should have a citizens' assembly, or a number of citizens' assemblies, in order to process this major issue. So my ideal thing would be a situation where citizens' assemblies become a normalised part of democratic processes. We're no longer reliant on short, contentious, party-driven campaigns or whatever. So that's about as much as I would want to say at the moment. Simply raise a couple of questions. I think, pardon me, there's a place for political parties in deliberative democracy. And it may be that deliberative democracy, citizens' assemblies, would be challenging the tried and tested ways of politicians. And frankly, when I look at some of the political events in Britain and other parts of the world, that might be no bad thing. I think also a think tank would be worth engaging with the idea of a citizens' assembly, driving it, informing it. And I think were we to go down that road, I think ILIAD, the information literacy discipline, would be crucial. I think members of citizens' assemblies would need to have good information literacy consciousness and ability techniques to help them and guide them. So that's my contribution for the moment. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bill. And now I'd like to hand over to Saeeda Shahid. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the organizers and Sheila for setting up this all. So hello everyone, happy to be here. I joined Towson University very recently as an assistant professor. However, I'm born and grew up and started my career as an educator and researcher in Pakistan. So I'm presenting this perspective of information literacy as a discipline, but how it looks from the lens of the world, which is very different. When I try to look and when I become part of this ILIAD group, so I try thinking information literacy as a discipline from that lens. And so I look so many opportunities and simultaneously challenges. I'm not trying to be the voice of all those countries which are in that part and which you can say like low income countries because every context is very unique. However, I'm taking this opportunity to represent a part of the world which is different and similar in so many contexts. So this slide, which you can see right now on your screen, shows the growth of information literacy in Western world as well as in Asia. So at the bottom, you can see the timeline show that this part of the world is behind in information literacy literature growth. So the minimal growth started nearly 1992 in comparison to the Western world. And at the time, the researchers in that part of the world very lately realized the importance of information literacy. So we are already far behind that recognition. So we entered the growth period in 2001 and then in the development phase in 2011. And you could see I have listed down some of the topics which we started researching, like the researchers in that part of the world related to information literacy. They started thinking and they're researching those idea of information literacy skills as assessment, information literacy instruction, practices, education, and a little bit working on the development of the framework. Next slide, please. Sheila, can you move to the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. So here, I just want to show you to establish that how lens from a different world is different when you see information literacy. So this is one of the example I want to show you here to develop more understanding that how low-income country context is very much different from the Western world. On the right side, you can see there is a very famous Big Six model of information literacy, and on the left side, the information literacy model for primary schools in Pakistan, which is an outcome of my PhD project. So you could see that the step and the sequence is not similar in Pakistani context as well as in Western context. So more specifically, if you could look at the green dotted boxes, so you could see that the locating information step is at number 4 in the Pakistani model. However, that skill level is at step 2 and 3 in the Western models. So just wanted to establish that how information literacy context is different in that part of the world. Because the context is different, the scenario and the infrastructure is different. Next slide, please. Not only that low-income countries are facing challenges which might be similar to the Western world as well, but the magnitude is very high. So you can see on this slide, there are different issues and challenges which I mentioned through infographic. So if you see, let's say we talk about the first challenge, which is related to digital citizenship, as Bill also mentioned this perspective. So 70% of the 10 years old girls, 10 years old children are unable to read and understand a simple written text in those countries. So taking this into account, I simultaneously draw on the paper of Johnston and Sheila, where they talk about information literacy as a discipline. So both authors argued that information literacy equips individuals with those skills that foster responsible digital citizenship. And Bill also had this perspective. So taking this all benefits into account, I think it's if we think information literacy into a very big picture as a discipline, it might not be the only solution to all these problems, which you can see on the screen right now. But however, it could be one of the drivers which contributes to the economic growth, maybe by fostering an informed and skilled workforce capable of driving innovation and productivity in the society. I don't think so I'm able to talk about each piece in detail, which are on the screen right now. However, the purpose of this slide is to show you the landscape of the challenges faced by these low-income countries, and simultaneously thinking about information literacy in a big picture would surely set the right direction and enable individuals to analyze the information used more effectively, which is for sure essential for personal and societal development. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to conclude, if we all agree and recognize this idea of information literacy as a discipline, so as a starting point, I just want to draw on the research paper of Maybe and co-authors. They identified these characteristics of discipline, these 6 components of a discipline. So if I try to fit these 6 components into low-income countries scenario, so what I get. So if you see the components in the green, those are the components which are very well fitted to the if we think about information literacy as a discipline in low-income countries, and in that most specifically the South Asian region, we do have community of scholars and we do have this history and tradition. So the components you can see in the orange dotted box, those are the components which are there in a very good shape, but still we need to work on those. We need to progress with those components to really see information literacy as a discipline. And the ones you can see on the right side, which is in the red dotted box, those are the missing components. So this is my personal perspective. This is definitely further research needs to be done on this area. So based on my experience and started my career over there in that part of the world. So I think that if we work on the components which are in the orange box and we simultaneously started working on the components which are in the red boxes, then definitely we can see the future of information literacy as a discipline in those countries as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saida. So at this point, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. I need to go off to see if anyone's answered the Google questionnaire, so I can present the results of that. And so I wondered, Karen, I noticed that you were picking up a question from the text chat. I think also if people would like to contribute, if you'd like to put up your hands, and I'll just dodge out for a minute or two, if that's okay, and I'll, while I find the Google form and before I share the results.
Yes, yes, of course. So this has hopefully been a very thought-provoking conversation. That's what it's meant to be across our our information literacy community, sort of things to think about, things to consider, things to ponder, and also recognizing the global, as Dr. Shahid has shared, sort of different perspectives globally around this idea of information literacy, and recognizing also that we can all, it's big enough. Information literacy is big enough. It's broad enough. It's strong enough to sort of embrace all of these disciplinary perspectives that are evident in other disciplines as well. So this is not unique for information literacy, I would suggest. I invite other panelists to chime in at this point while we wait for Sheila to gather her data.
Thanks, Karen. So it's been really interesting sort of watching the chat and, I guess one thing that Karen and I have talked a lot about just on our own is this idea of, that like while structural things could have changed, and we talked about some possibilities, but we also talk about the idea that, maybe for some people it would be that we conceptualize information literacy different, but the actual practice within institutions doesn't change that much. It really would depend, I think, as Karen reminds me regularly, on the context and, the needs of the organization. And so I kind of think, one of the things about that we've been doing with these presentations is we kind of want to open a conversation, and we want to hear what people, who are doing this work, right, are thinking about, and how they think it might work, as opposed to sort of coming to you, with a solution of this is the way it would work. So just sort of throwing that out there is one thing we think about is that it could play out in a variety of ways, and we're really interested in sort of the conversation about what people think might be, possibilities, if we recognized information literacy as a discipline.
In fact, I can now share I've put the link to the slides in text chat. I'll just pick up, well, perhaps I'll just present the findings, and then I noticed there's an interesting contribution in the text chat. So I'll just briefly share the findings. Making sure I can, yeah, I think it should be that one. And so these are responses. We've had 20 responses. And the top picks. This is not a great piece of kind of research presentation, but as I said, it was listing the words that we've had so far. So top from these two is challenging and unsure. It's interesting that at least one person clicked everything except restrictive. Also with 10, has potential and thought-provoking and part of library science. That's an interesting question that came up in one of the other one of the other panels we've had about how it related to library science. So that's something we could possibly pick up. And then in the positive side, it looks like necessary is the one that's come up top. Societal imperative, positive, transformational, transdisciplinary. I'm just picking up, and again, apart from heady, it looks like all of those. Interestingly, the added responses, there's academic respect, overdue, terminology, classification, clarification, understanding, and obviously someone in the audience that has an interesting and opposite perspective, unfounded, atheoretical, and desperate. So I don't know if whoever had got that perspective wants to contribute, or if not, that's an interest. To be honest, I don't think I feel desperate. I don't think we've talked about desperation as part of. So yes, that's a really interesting one to think about. Also, the atheoretical is another one to debate, because to some extent we're basing our idea on the fact that there is a knowledge base there. And I think yes, no, I'm giving too much of my personal perspective here. I'll shut up. So I think you should be able to see the results of that. But I think there'll probably be an email that goes afterwards, and I'll make sure that the copy of the results go out with that. I'm thinking perhaps I didn't want to miss out on the interesting contribution from chat. Perhaps I'll stop sharing for a moment. So I don't know if, I think first of all, because I want to make sure people in the participating outside the panel get a chance to contribute. Dr. Joan Wakasa Morumba, I don't know whether you'd like to share your comment in voice, or if you want to.
Yes, I would do that. Yeah, so
It's a little bit faint. I don't know whether you can turn up the volume at all.
okay. All right, is that okay?
That's better. That's definitely better.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we have a commission for university education with academics programs. And I took that as a chance to try and implement information literacy in the university. So I went by the standards and developed a syllabus or curriculum for that case. And it went through the approval processes, and then it was approved by the university senate, and then we had to offer information literacy to all the undergraduate students that come or join the university. And then what happened, the standard indicated that the course should be taught in collaboration with the academic librarians. So we had to develop the curriculum between the LIS faculty and the librarians. We agreed, and therefore there was co-teaching where we needed the practical skills. Then we had the librarians come in and we offered the course. So information literacy became one of the common courses in the university. And I think now they are in their 5th year, because I left last year to come this way. Yeah, so I think if we can consider fighting for this information literacy to become a core, I think that is something we can start from. Because if we offer that as one shot, again, it doesn't get the credit that it deserves. And we all agree that information literacy is required by any student, any researcher, faculty, staff. It's all over. And therefore, we need this skill to be nurtured among our students. And we have, in Kenya, we have so many universities, but at least I know of 3 that have implemented that. And I know slowly by slowly, others are joining and following suit. So that was my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm aware that there's only a few minutes left. Sarah Pavey has given several very interesting contributions to do with schools and raised some good information and questions to do with that. Jane Possekery is talking about information literacy as a discipline might help to tackle the problems in people recognizing it, but as being a thing, but it feels like a very big mountain to climb. And Connie Hollin would like to know its impact on K-12, which is schools in the UK. And the limited knowledge of people who are in schools. And the implications for the workforce are raised by Helen Kula. So I wondered if any of my colleagues on the panel would want to, as a final thing, respond to any of those points, or the ones kind of raised through the responses to the Google form. Do jump in. Or if you don't want to jump in, I'll continue.
Yeah, try to
Okay, go ahead.
looking through the chat, so just responding to the chat now, which is why it's a bit slow to stick on the microphone. Yeah, I think a lot of what's coming up in the chat is very similar to what's come up at other sessions. I think it made a point that it was at Willow during the summer, and there was definitely a lot of movement in North America anyway. It'd be interesting to see if that's replicated or not in other continents, other parts of the world. There definitely seemed to be a move on where librarians were sometimes getting kind of wrong-footed because faculty would come into them and saying, look, how about this? We want that. And faculty, I think, we're still trapped in earlier forms of like the one-shot slot, and also in situations where they didn't have an easy connection to faculty as equals. And my sense of it, without laboring the point too much, is that if we were to tackle this from a disciplinary point of view, we perhaps might make a lot more progress and be better placed to deal with change forces affecting institutions. But I would again finish by underlining the idea that it isn't all about education as such. There's a place for community aid, for informal education. I think there's also a place for community activism and the kinds of work that people do when they're trying to bring about change. And I think those kind of works, my experience of them is that they would be improved if people had a better grasp of the information context that they were active in. That's a kind of personal view, but anyway.
Yeah, and Bill, I can follow up. It's a 2024 trends report. One of the last items is people are seeking community connection. So whether that's in the IL community or extensions of that, lifelong learning, however that looks, this is a trend in our information ecosphere that I think needs to be attended to. And if information literacy is adopted as a discipline, we have a better opportunity for conversation for policymakers, stakeholders, educators, the everyday information experience that people have. So whether it's for health or for general information or just figuring out how to fix tacos for tonight, that works.
Yeah, let's finish with the tacos then, because I realize we've reached the hour. We have Lewis here who's representing the CILIP Information Literacy Group. Was there anything you want to add at the end?
Yes, just to say thank you so much for this really interesting session and for all the participants for your questions and comments. The session will be made available. You'll receive an email with the link for the evaluation if you don't have the time to complete right now. And as Sheila said, we'll send the link with slides as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you soon then.
Thank you. And this is part of an ongoing conversation, so there will be more if you're interested in joining in.
Indeed.
Bye-bye then.
Bye.